All right, I am recording now. All right, so let's start from the beginning. And I will be asking y'all to participate because I want to make sure you understand everything that we're doing. Because don't do you any good that you go through this and you fully don't understand, or you may understand some of it, but there's some things you don't understand and that may be a problem that you may struggle with. So I want to make sure I can help you get as much clarity as we can. Sometimes it may not, it still may go over your head. You may have to just keep going over and over until something starts to click, and repetition is the key here. So let us begin. So the first thing I want to ask you, Ollie, both of you, we have right here on line one. Who want to kind of break down line one for me so I can see how much you understand? What is line one?
Seems
Somebody
to be
break it down.
just it seems to be just a general input just to get user input, user validation
And
kind of
where's
thing.
that coming from? Where's that information coming from?
Um I don't know. It seems to kind of be like a black box kind of thing. Like you just put that and then you kind of get the user input. You know what I mean?
That's okay. That's okay. That's a good start. Now I can make an assessment. Now I can understand where you are. So now let me reinforce what you just said. But before I do that, let me give Ying an opportunity.
For sure.
Yang, what is line one saying?
So that's a variable that isn't going to change, and it's one that was input from like the JSON file. So that's something that like the code will go and retrieve. That's my guess.
But how does, when you say retrieve, what lets you know that? What jumps out at you to let you know, okay, it's retrieving something?
That's a really good question. I don't know.
Okay, see, now we know where to start, right? All right, so let me break it down to you. Now you're correct. This is that const. Const is a keyword for variables. We add them to variables so that the compiler, because I want you to think like the compiler. If you had a chance to look at some of the few little videos that I've been putting, I'm trying to get caught up on these videos for you. Hopefully I can start getting more videos up this weekend because I was actually sick. Last week kind of slowed me down, but now I feel a whole lot better. But we know right here that this word input is what is it? It is what is input?
Is there a function?
It's a variable. Now, what is a variable? Either one of y'all know what a variable is? Or
We,
you probably know what it is, you just don't remember it, or you may not be able to explain it. And that's why I want to make sure I help you out.
basically something that you're setting basically, well, in this case, like in terms of user input, I was setting the user input to a variable. Variable being like let something. I know you're not supposed to define something using the word, but yeah. So you go ahead. You go.
No, that's okay. You're doing good. Both of y'all doing good because what I'm doing right now, I'm exercising your brain to help you to start to retain this. A variable is just a container in its simplest form. It's just a container. It's designed to hold something. And what is designed to hold is right here, that value. Require anything. Now remember, this is called an assignment operator. That equal sign, I want y'all to get in the habit. I'm gonna keep reinforcing this. Call it an assignment operator in programming. Don't call it an equal sign. You can call it an equal sign once you got experience. Once you get experience, call it whatever you want because you already know what you're doing. But right now you're learning. And that's an assignment operator. Understand everything to the left of the assignment operator is going to be it's going to be a variable. Everything to the right of the assignment operator is a value. A value is also an expression. Y'all remember that in your reading? How you doing, Chris?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. So we're just reviewing right now because it's important to really get a strong understanding of this, right? What we've learned so far. So here, a variable is a container. I'm gonna break it down to you to help you try to remember what I'm saying here, to associate what a variable is. Think of it like this. Okay, let's say you just got you ordered something. Let's say you ordered a brand new leather jacket, right? And there's a, let's call it, let's say it's now some of y'all might be animal activists, so I'm just gonna say it's a nice, I ain't gonna even say leather, it's a nice jacket, right? You just ordered a nice jacket and you got it coming, right? You got to order it and it's coming, and you like this jacket so much that you are going to put it in its own container or box. So you have this box, and then you even got a name for your jacket. You're going to call it, that's my special jacket, right? So, because variables have to be the name, you have to name them according to whatever the value is. Descriptive is the word I'm looking for, descriptive. So you got this box, and on this box, you write special jacket. Now, if I ask you to declare a variable, what does that mean when I say declare a variable? And it's right here on line 6. And Chris, you can participate too. Line 6 is declaring a variable. And we have candidate name. We've already gave you a declared variable, right? So candidate name, that's descriptive because we know we want to put a name there, right? So we got candidate name. And that's just declaring a variable. So declaring a variable is just like that box that has special jacket on it. It's a box that I'm declaring, and I'm keeping the box open because it's empty. So all I need to do is think like the compiler. When I see that empty box, I know that I'm going to put something in it. I know, and what I'm going to put in it is going to be that special jacket. But right now it's empty. There's nothing there. I've just declared it. Now my jacket comes. It comes in the mail, and I'm ready to put my jacket in a special box. This assignment operator, that's you. Because what you've done is you've taken that jacket, which is a value, and you are assigning it to its container that you're putting it in. And then you close the box up. You know, go ahead, Ying.
Sorry. Yeah, I was thinking about our last reading. It was saying about how when we name that, it's telling us what we're going to do with that value. Like that's the action.
Say it again. What the action? Then now that's going to be a method. So when you said action, she's talking about a method. And so I'm gonna make clarity for that for you, okay? So it makes all sense because right now what we're talking about, we're just talking about declaring and initializing a variable. And we're going to get to that action part. So, so here, now let's go back to the analogy. I got this box. I got this box that's called special jacket. That's a variable name that's descriptive. I know that I want to put a special jacket inside that box. I get my special jacket, the equal sign, which is the assignment operator. You're the assignment operator. So put yourself in the shoes of the assignment operator. And what you've done is you're taking that special jacket and you're now assigning it to the container that is going in. And now the container is closed up and it says on its special jacket. How do you know it's a special jacket in there? Because you put it in there. That assignment operator, and that's what the compiler knows. So when you decide that you're ready to go for your special jacket, all you have to do is look for the reference. The reference is the name that you wrote on the box, special jacket. You know a special jacket is in there. And when you're ready to use that special jacket, you're going to the box and get it. You know where it is because you wrote special jacket on it and you know what's inside of it. That's what declaring and initializing a variable. Whenever you add that operator, assignment operator, what the compiler is doing, it sees the const. Const is letting them know that something is going to be final. That means it can't be changed. It's immutable. And it sees this input variable. You can name it whatever you want to name it. It knows it's a variable though. And it has to name input. And how variables work. Variables work. Variables work. Yeah, I will have time to assist. We're going to go through part 2, Chris. I saw your message. We're going to go through all part 1, 2, and 3. We're going to go through the whole thing, but we're going to review as we go along because I want to make sure you understand how we get to where we're going. So now it sees that input. We calling it input. Like I said, it can be anything, but input makes sense to you. But to the compiler, what it's doing is taking it and it's being stored in memory. It goes back to binary numbers. And I kind of talk about that in one of my videos on at the beginning of chapter 5 that I had started. So here we have input. And then in that input, we have what we have next. The compiler sees the assignment operator, and then it sees this word require. It knows that require is a function because of the parentheses. So y'all see my screen, right? So if I delete that, it sees that require is a function and it means something. This is a function that you didn't write. This is something that's built in. And it knows that it wants to get access to whatever this module is. Readline sync is a module. So if readline sync is a module, it's stored in our node module. Now, if you go to last week's video, Bright and Squirrelly, I actually broke down all of this little information right here. And Joshua, I sent you the link, and I don't know if any of you have been watching the videos. But I broke all of this down right here. I broke down what's inside this folder. I broke down what's inside here. You see that node modules? It's called get ignore. What that means is that it won't, when you push your code to the repository, it would ignore the node module and the .vs code information because those are huge files and you don't want to push anything to your repository that's unnecessary. But I kind of went over that. So if you will go back and look at that video from last week, it will break it down. And I reviewed last week too. The same thing that we're going over now, we're going to go over. I went over it last week. So what I'm doing is I'm building on top of what you've already learned because I want it to stick because you're going to need this throughout this whole course. So here we got this read line sync. Now, what I want to do is I want to know what's inside the input now, because how do we test something? We want to know something in there. We do what? We do a console.log. We want to print it to the console, right? If I print this to the console, what do you think is going to output down here on the console? Anybody have any idea? Silence means you're telling me no.
Is it going to come up as undefined?
Why would you think it would come up undefined? Explain.
Well, we have that it says require. Readline sync is there, but we're doing nothing with it.
Yeah, we're not doing anything with it, but it's something. It's a module. It has a whole lot of information in it. And remember, our variable input is holding that information. So what required knows it's a function that was written to go in and search in node module for this module or search anywhere in your program. Because later on, when we get into dealing with a framework or a library like Angular, we don't call it require, we call it import. But here we're requiring it, right? So if I run this, that's everything that's inside input right now. It's an object that has all of these functions in it. And you know what we have in there? We have this prompt function and we have that question function. So that's what's actually being stored in that input. And how do I know that it's a object? And so I'm gonna do type of. And if I run type of, it tells me input is an object. Now this is gonna make sense in a second. So far, anybody have any questions? No? All right, does this make sense? And y'all can be honest with me. If it don't make sense, let's make it make sense.
So I'll take a stab at a question if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So we know it's not a string, whatever is within readline sync. We also realize that it's not like an array or our numbers. What qualifies something as an object?
Okay. Well, what qualifies anything at first of all, and this is something that how JavaScript works. Everything in JavaScript is an object, except primitive data types. So right there off the back, everything is an object. Arrays are object, strings, object. Everything is an object when you store it inside of a variable. Although if I would have just put a string here, it would have came back a string. But, and I'm gonna show you in a minute how we know it's an object. Everything is an object, and I'm gonna show you in a minute when we get to our input. Well, how I know that this is an object in your class. All right, for a second, run back. In here, we haven't taught y'all about objects yet. It's coming up. But everything within a curly brace is an object. So that's how it knows that. It sees this curly brace right here, and it knows that it's an object. That makes sense? That does answer your question, rather.
Yep, it does. Thank you.
All right. So now we understand what's inside input. We know that it's got some information in there that's important. And according to our assignment, it asked us to do this. And you've already got your assignment 1 and 2 in and 3 in yet, Ying? You got all 3 in, or you just got 2 parts in?
Just the first 2.
All right, cool. Well, let's make sure we understand where we are. And it says here on dot, and I want to go over it real quick. I'm gonna go through parts 1 and part 2 fairly quick. But I'm gonna still be asking you a question because I want to make sure you understand what's going on here. And so it goes to do 1.1a and to start a code on the line below, to do comment, define a variable and call it candidate name. It's already been defined for us. And then it says with an initial value of the empty string. So I have to give it a value. So what I'm doing here, I'm assigning an empty string. That was the question. That's what they asked us to do. One of the things that I want to encourage y'all and help you understand, think of these questions, these instructions, like what we call acceptance criteria. This is something you're going to learn when you get into your internships. When they start scrumming and they start giving you stories, they're going to call them ACs. ACs are accepting criteria, and they have to be met before the story is complete. So before all this instruction, part 1, part 2, part 2, part 3, this is one big story. And each one of these stories, and this one big story, have all these multiple tasks. So in order for each task to be complete, I have to follow the instruction. So the instruction was to give an empty string. I did that. So now task A is complete. And now on task B, I got to go to 1.1b inside the ask function, write a code asking the user to enter their name in the program and store the value as candidate name. So now if I come down here, here's the function right here. Now, let me ask y'all this. How much do you know about functions? What do you understand right now about functions? Since you've already learned them or started learning them, put it that way. So we can know where I can assess where you are.
I kind of took it as function is kind of like a let, but here's where we probably will be using more like other methods, where in some of the exercises we did like 2 uppercase or 2 string.
Hmm. And those are methods, but a function is a little bit different. What a function does, and there's a difference between functions and JavaScript. When we get over into Java, there are no functions. Everything is a method. And it'll make sense later on. But right now in JavaScript, it's a function. And remember, think of functions, they're a verb. They're just like methods, and so to speak, just a little bit different. And I'll explain the difference. But a function is basically you're creating some reusable code, basically. You want to use it when I want to reuse it on something. If I want to run a algorithm or something, I'm going to create a function. And we know that it's a function because we got that keyword. It says function, right? Later on, we're going to teach you about anonymous functions and we're going to teach you about arrow functions. But right now, these are called named functions. And the thing about with function, and she kind of hit on it in a class, Carrie, right? I don't want to mess her name up.
Yep.
She hit on it in class about function. Normally, how the DOM works, it goes from top to bottom. Functions are more like stored in memory. You can asynchronously pull them in. They don't have to go from top to bottom. How you work a function is how you call it or invoke it. So they're the same word. Calling and invoking a function is the same thing. It's basically some actions that you're putting to the side and you bring them in when you're ready for them. So they don't have to be in order, basically, is what I'm saying. They can actually be just put in memory somewhere, sitting there dormant, waiting for you to activate them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, we have a function called ask for name. That sounds very descriptive, isn't it? It's asking for a name. How do I know it's a function? Also, not just only for the keyword, but the parenthesis. Every function, when it's being declared and initialized, this is the syntax. And then you have an opening and closing curly brace. You got it sits on the line just like this. This is how you write a function. You have that opening curly brace on the same line as the function name. And then on the next, on a separate line, you have the closing curly brace. You have to have an opening and closing curly brace. This is what we call the code block. This is where you're going to put all your code inside this block. And so we have this function name, right, called ask for name. Inside of here, I want to write some code. Now, this is your task right here, B. You say you write code asking the user to enter the name into the program and store the value into candidate name. Well, we've already told you some instructions here. I know I want to put it in candidate name, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my variable. So now I want to, it's already been declared up here on line 5. So I don't have to put let in front of it inside this function. And it'll kind of throw me a little warning error, let you know that it's already been declared, because all of these variables right here from 5 to 12, this is what we call global variables. All of these functions, all 3 of these functions, they have access to these variables. But notice something here. Do you notice right here on the grade quiz, this let grade, that variable, it's only accessible by grade quiz. I can't get access to let grade or this grade variable in the ask question or ask for name, because that variable is only local to that function, and that's called scope. Have y'all read about scope? Do you understand scope, how scope works? And it's okay if you don't, because we'll go over it. We're gonna make sure you drill it in. But what I'm doing is I'm laying layer by layer that makes sure you can retain this. So here, I have a variable, the variable that I used up there that I initialized with the empty string. Now, this is another bit of a rule that I want you to remember. Whenever you assign something an empty string or an empty array or an empty object or the number 0, you're going to be adding something to it. That's the simplest form. That's a rule I want you to remember. I created this variable called candidate name, and I'm assigning it an empty string so that I can add something to it later. Does that make sense? Here, and on line 17, I got that variable. And now I want to add something to that variable. What do I want to add to that variable? I want to do what? And yeah, I've already done this already because you got 1 and 2 done, right? You did input name, right? Input dot question with the parenthesis. I'm passing in a string. What is your name? So that's what most of y'all wrote. Most of y'all did it like that, right? That makes sense, right? But what I want to ask you this question, both of you, Chris, you there? Did you make it back, Chris? Okay.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm back.
All right, let me ask y'all this. We know what is input now. We have it on line 17. How do I know what this syntax is? That's what I want to make sure y'all understand, because this is important. What is input on line 17? That I'm assigning this input dot question to this candidate name. Input is what? And we did the console.log of it, right? Input is what?
An object.
There we go. It is. It's an object. Now, let me give you guys something to help you identify it as an object just by looking at it without even running the console.log, right? If any of you have seen any of my video, what is that dot right there? Right after input, there's a dot. What is that dot? We call it the dot notation. And the dot notation is an access modifier. I want you to remember that. And here's a rule. Everything that's to the left of the dot is an object. Even if it was just a string stored in it, it would be an object now, because that dot is letting you know it's an object. Everything to the right of the object is either going to be a method or a property. Do you know the difference between a method and a property? Do y'all know the difference? And y'all can say yes or no. If you say no, if you don't, it's okay.
I don't. I always take it as a method.
Everything after the dot is a method, is what you're saying? Or do you know the difference? Do you know the difference?
I like think of methods like tools, and then a property. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna give you, just by looking at it, I'm gonna show you how to identify it. Anything that has parentheses after it, like question has a parenthesis after it, right? If I take this out of here, anything with a parenthesis is a method. If it doesn't have a parenthesis, it's a property. What's a property that you're familiar with? You're familiar with length, right? Are y'all familiar with that property?
Yes.
That's how you know. Anything to the right of the dot is either a property or a method. Everything to the left of that dot is an object. So just by looking at it, you should be able to tell immediately what it is. Is it sticking? Is that something that's sticking right now to y'all in your minds?
Yeah, that helps a lot.
All right, so good. So now we have this this whole value of input dot question. Now, input dot question by itself, if I was to go ahead and council log candidate, it's just going to come back blank. Question takes an argument, and that argument is, what is your name? And what question is doing, it wants to get access. Remember, it wants to that dot is an access modifier. It wants to get access to whatever that object is holding. This is everything that object input has in it. That question is looking for something in there to be able to modify. And what is it going to modify? That prompt. And so here, question, it's an input that question, what is your name? When I run this, it's going to ask, what is your name? And then, now this is it's no magic here, but this is how this works. So I put TER in there, tear, right? What is it doing right now? When I type my name, because it just prompted me, all this did was ask me a question. It prompted me to the console, what is your name? And I type my name, part of my name in there, and I hit enter. Can you tell me what just happened?
Console stored the input as a variable.
It stored my input as a variable. Explain, so that make sure I understand what you're saying.
Candidate name is the variable, and you were prompted to put an input in, and the input is the value of the variable.
Okay, yeah. And so what's the actual value here?
I'm drawing a blank.
That's okay. How about you, Yang? What's the actual value?
I thought the value would have been the question, and your answer would have been just collecting, like prompting the user for information, which is going to be called later to
Okay.
the other.
No, you guys, I'm getting you to think. The actual value is my name. Because remember, the variable holds the value. This is just an input. This input that question, because check this out. Let me do this. If I go ahead and I delete this, what is my name in there, right? And then I go ahead and I do a console.log, right? And console.log is your friend right now, but once you get more and more advanced in this, you're not going to be using it as much. But in the beginning, you want to understand how this stuff works. So when I run this console.log, nothing pops up, right? There's nothing there right now because input.question isn't the value. Let me show you. So now this is what the value is. So all this is, what is your name? That string that I put in there, that's just an argument. What this input does is the compiler knows that I just need to push this to the console. So now when I run this, check this out. So I'm gonna run this. What is my name? That's what the value is. Year. Even I was meant to type tear, so I don't have to type my full name out. That is the value. Now let me show you something here, because remember, you store values into the variables. Now look at this. Let's see something here. Let me do that. Do you think this will work without that variable? Yes? No? It's okay. Y'all don't know what will happen, right? All right, so I'm gonna run it. What did it just do? It still ran, right? I didn't have to put it in a variable. So this is letting you know that all this is doing is running into the console. That's how the compiler knows when it was looking at when it was doing this runtime. It's like, okay, all I need to do is prompt this. It's just a prompt. It's an input. Once I put my name in it, that's the value, and then that's what gets stored in the actual variable. Is that making sense to y'all? Go ahead and ask me some questions. Just say, hey, okay, Dad, okay, you just kind of threw me for a loop there. Did I throw you for a loop?
Yeah, I didn't expect it to print.
Right. But that's what I want you to understand, because how this programming works, the variables are just what we store stuff in. I can write these code without variables. The reason why we use variables, so I don't have to keep going through and rewriting input dot question. All I got to do, all I got to do is like here, we got this require inside this input. I can keep reusing this over and over. But then when I want to go ahead and do the input dot question, I want to be able to store my result or my input. All it is, remember, an input, everything is stored as a string, no matter what. It's stored as a string. But I got to put it somewhere to store. So my response is the actual value.
Okay.
Okay. So now we know that that input is not the value. It's just a prompt. That's all it is. It's just a prompt. And the value is my name, Terrence. That makes sense? Y'all still with me? We cooking with gas yet? Okay, so we just satisfied the next feature that we had to go through, our task. We just satisfied B. Now it says to do 1.1c underneath to write the message to the council greeting the user using the name we just provided. So down here is where I want to do the now in this function run program. Do y'all know how this is running, how that works, how that's actually working? All right, this is why I went over in the video. In this index.js, you have it right here. Remember that require this candidate testing, this is this right here. This is that file right there. That is a module. This is high level stuff we're teaching you, because once we get over into writing in Angular, we're going to call those components. That's all they are. We're going to just call them component, but they're modules. And we're going to use the word import instead of require. But we want you to understand it now. So what here in this JS file, index.js, you'll understand this when we get into, like I said, Angular. This is the file that gets served up to the browser. So you'll put your modules or your components here to run so you can see it inside of the browser. So right here, that's what that run program is. And we're exporting it right here, run program. That's getting exported. That's why we don't want you to touch this. So it's getting exported. And in this functions, although they don't read from top to, you can put them anywhere you want, as long as wherever you invoke them. But inside the function, it reads from top to bottom. So the first thing that it reads is ask for name. And we see that right there, ask for name. And so what I want to do is I want to console.log that response. So by me putting it right here, I know that I can, I'm gonna use a template literal and say hello. And remember, in template literals, in order to put a variable in there, we got to put it within the curly $ curly braces. And then we want to do candidate name. Did I spell that right? Nope, I didn't. All right, so I know that this is going to run unless I spell candidate name wrong, because it's going to ask my question. It runs that function. Once that function is complete, then it's going to run down here to console.log. This runs next. And then when I do the question, that question is going to run after that console.log. It's an order. It's an order of precedence, basically. It starts from the bottom and it works its way down. Is that clear? How this working?
Yeah, it makes sense for me.
How about you, Chris? So I don't know if Chris is still there. So what is your name, Terrence? And it says, hello, Terrence. Because I know it was stored in this variable candidate name. And what I did was I got access to it. And remember, candidate name is a global variable. I can get access to it through that function because it's up here. And what I did was I used it inside this function. Once the function ran, my name is still stored right here in that variable on the outside. So that's how program is able to get access to that variable. Now, if I was to comment this out right here, I'm going to get an error. I got a reference error, candidate name. It doesn't recognize it because down here in this code, I made it a module that is being exported. And so it can't find it. So that's why we put it at the top. I just want to make sure I make that you can see that and it makes sense. So right now we satisfied 1.1c. So now we can go to the next task. And in this task, I've done this, right? You've gone ahead and we got these three variables: question, correct answer, and candidate answer. We have that, right? So here on the question, all I need to do is assign this value right here. And how do I do that? I'm going to give my assignment operator, and then I'm going to put that in. So now that question has now been initialized. The second thing is it's telling me to initialize an answer. So I'm going to go over here to the correct answer, do the same thing. Now, right here on the candidate answer, I want to do the exact same thing that I did with the candidate name because I want to store something in here because I want to use it later. So I'm going to initialize that with an empty string right now because right now I have a singular string. When we get down to questions, we're going to be doing arrays. So right now I've got part A done. I've satisfied my task in part A. Now it says find to do 1.2b using the question variable, display the question and prompt the candidate for their answer. Now, given what we just talked about, I'm right here. Do y'all understand how you got to that point? What should I write right here? Because y'all already did part 2. Y'all already up to part 2, so y'all should already have this one done. But I want to make sure y'all can explain to me why you wrote that code the way you wrote it. So right here on line 22, how am I going to satisfy that task? 1.2b. What do I need to do?
You'll assign a variable for candidate answer or declaring a variable.
Well, it's already been declared. So all I got to do is just come here. That's where I'm storing it, right? I'm going to store it because remember, I made this an empty string. And remember the rule, whenever there's an empty string, you create an empty string or an empty array, or empty object or 0, you're planning on storing something there, right? You're going to add something to it, push something into it, right? And so I have that variable that I want to store whatever my answer is. I want to store it in candidate answer, right? So I got that variable. So that's what we know so far, right? So how would I do that now? How would I get my answer into candidate answer? What do I write?
You'll use the object input question, and then you'll put in the question Um, who was the first American woman in space? I think that's the question.
That is the question. But do I need to do that?
Oh, no, you can actually just reference the variable question.
There we go. That's what I'm looking for. That's what variables are. We just need to reference them. We don't, that's why we use them all the time, because we want to make sure we're able to reference those variables, right? That's why I was saying right up in here, this input that question, that's not the value. All it is a prompt. The value was the information that I inputted, which was my name that's being stored in the variable. Remember, variables hold values. That makes sense? Kamari, you there? I don't know if she's there. If you are talking, you're muted. So here, let me run it. So now I'm gonna write my name. Hi, Terrence. And now I ask the first question, right? And then so I know it's Sally Ride. So now, how do I know that Sally Ride that value is being stored in the candidate answer? How will I know that? What would I do? All I need to do is a console.log and console.log candidate answer. So it'll let me know that it's being stored there. Now, you all should have already satisfied this and already got that result for that. So now the last part of this one is 1.1c, which is right here. Now, all I have to do is pay attention to these words. Okay, Kamar, I see you. You on the road. I got it. There's 1.1c, 2c. It says check candidate answer. When you see something like that, what is it? What do you think it's asking you to do? When it says check candidate answer, how would you write that in code when you see that term? And it says check candidate answer to see if it's correct. What should you be thinking? I want to check. How do I check something? What am I looking for? I'm looking when I'm comparing something. Or checking something? What will I use to do that? There you go. If else. So we got an if, right? So here's the syntax of if. And you might want to get in I call it the boilerplate. And so in here, I want to do what? I want to be able to check. It says check candidate answer. So that's one of my variables right here that I'm storing something in. I want to check the candidate answer. And I'm going to use a strictly equal because I want it to be exact. And the other thing that I'm comparing it to, I'm comparing that to the correct answer, right? That makes sense? That makes sense, everybody? And this curly braces, this is a code block. Now, I know it may be confusing when we start getting into objects because objects use curly braces. But when we see curly braces after functions and after conditionals and after for loops, those are the code blocks. Those are what we call code blocks. And inside here, I want to print. It says provide basic feedback to the candidate, letting them know that their answer is correct or not. That lets me know that I know it needs to be printed back. So we're going to use words like print or display, or another word, basic feedback. Those are basically clues that I need to do a console.log. Those are one of the things I want you to look up. I want you to always pay attention to how you're being asked to do things and look for the clue of what it's asking you so you can solve it. So, and I'm just going to do it real simple. So I'm going to do correct. And now the thing about it is this will actually work if it's false. So remember, everything within these parentheses is already going to be true. It's true. So what we're comparing, we're making sure if candidate answer is strictly equal to correct answer, if that is true, it's going to run this first block of code. But if it's false, it's going to run the second block of code. Does that make sense on what that means? Because remember, if it's false, if it's always going to be true unless you state it to be false. Not correct. No, that's not proper. But hey, we're just going to do this real quick. So here, whatever is in these parentheses on the conditional, it will be true. It's defaults to true. But I can make it false by putting a not sign in front of it. But I have to make it false initially. And all a not does when we get into it, it just reverse the comparison. But here, if candidate answer, which is the answer that I gave, is strictly equal to the correct answer, it's going to create, it's going to log correct. If it's false, it'll say not correct. So now if I run it, correct. So that works. So let's make sure that the condition is working when I don't do it right. So I'm just going to type a letter, not correct. So our conditional is working. So now we've satisfied the last task of part one. So now we're getting ready to go into part two. This is where we're going to start checking y'all understanding, because a lot of you got your part two done, but maybe you have questions, right? Yeah, have questions on part two.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. So here we go. Were you able to get your part two to run? Y'all got your part two to run properly?
Yeah, I think mine ran.
All right,
But I
cool.
think you're right. Like you kind of know what to do next, but how does it work is where I'm stuck.
No problem. So let's figure out how it works. Let me make sure I help y'all on that. Okay. All right. So right here, we have our task. And so here on our task, it says define the question and correct answer variable as an array. So now we're getting ready to get into arrays. So I'm going to go ahead and I got it here. I'm gonna copy it here so I ain't got to type all this in. I'm going down here to the question right here on line 10. I'm pasting this in. Now, as you can see, I have I put everything on its own separate line. Now, if y'all don't know this button exists, this is called a format button. You want to click on that all the time. When you write your code, always format your code. Make sure your code is completely formatted. Now, one of the things that I want you to understand is this is still line 14 because I don't have enough room. It's breaking for me. If I go ahead and make this bigger, it'll stretch everything out. So remember, look at the line number, not look at what's look like on different lines. So right now, this is line 12, line 13, line 14, line 15. We only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. And that's the questions. Now, we want to do the correct answers. So I need to put the array for the correct answers right here. This is an array. And these are lining up with each other. So if I do it like this, I'm gonna break it on the commas so you can kind of see it better. And now if I hit format, I think it's already formatted. There we go. So this Sally Rod is going to match up with this first question. Who was the first? So these are aligning by the index. So when you think about when you write your conditional, you're trying to align the indexes. So on right here on this candidate answer, I want to store something in here. What would I put right here to store something? I want to put all my answers into this. What would I write here? Candidate what? How would I write that? What would I do? Given what you've already learned so far. Line 24. How should I write that?
It'd be an empty array.
Okay. And why? Why did we choose an empty array?
There'll be multiple answers in it, and we're going to add something into it later.
Correct. And that's the whole thing. The great thing about arrays, you can have as many data types you want in it. Different, you can mix and match them. But if we have 5 questions, I'm putting 5 different questions in that one array instead of having each individual question like we did up here for our example. We did one simple question, which is one string. But here we're adding it to an array because we want to add multiple questions. All right. So now we've satisfied our first task of 1 and part 2. Now the second part is replace your code from 1.2b. 1.2b. So 1.2b is right here. This is where we're going to replace our code. Remember, you got to keep everything within this open and closing curly brace for each function. Because if you put anything on the outside of this, so like for instance, let's say if I do this and I put it on the outside of the function and I run this, what do you think is going to happen if I run that? What's the output? Anybody? You say undefined. Okay. Kamari says undefined. Do you agree? Now remember, undefined is a value. So if I run this, then it did everything in a different order, right? It didn't do it in the order I wanted because it put the candidate answer in between the function. It wasn't inside the function, or rather that was the asked question name. So I want to kind of let y'all see how this works when you're messing around with this code, because it makes a difference. Because sometimes if I delete this, if I delete that curly brace right there, that closing curly brace, I'm going to get an error. I'm going to get a compile error because the syntax is the expected end of input. But notice here though, it tells me right here, let me lift this up so you can see it. It's telling me it's on line 73. That's going to be confusing because this is line 73 right here. And you're like, wait a minute, my error is in line 73? No, your error wasn't in line 73. Your error was up here on line 35. So that's why it's important to kind of understand how this works. So I wanted y'all to see that. All right, so I've already did my name, right? So I got 1.2b I'm working on. And I need to do what? It says with a loop. That's the key right there, with a loop. So now I want to add a loop here, right? And so it says with a loop that programmatically asks each question in the array. Now, how well do y'all understand for loops? Are y'all confused with for loops, how it works? Or does it make sense?
I get the syntax of it, but if I were to read the code back to you, I don't know if I fully understand it.
That's okay. And this over here. So let's look at this. Now, this is the anatomy of a for loop. We have what we call the initializer. So I'm initializing I to 0, right? Does that make sense? Why am I doing that? Why am I initializing I at 0? Because I is still a variable, right? Going by what you understand, we're just putting a variable inside this for loop and we're initializing it to I, and I is initialized to 0. There's 3 statements that are inside a for loop. Let me break it down because we put them all on one line, but let me break it down for you so you can see it better. So I'm doing it like this. So that first statement is what we call the initializer. The second one is now, once it's been initialized, now I'm going to take that variable and I'm going to compare it to something. And what is I want to compare to? I want to get the questions up here, right? Because I want to ask each question. So when I come down here, I'm going to do the question, and I want to get the length of the question, right? Because I want to get everything that's inside that array. So remember what I said about the property, right? We got to use that property. How do I know it's a property? How do I know that's a property? How do I know length is a property? Y'all remember?
Because it's after the period, or but the dots, I forgot the word for it.
Yeah, it's an access modifier. It comes to the anything to the left of the, but what else is another thing that lets you know that it's a property?
It's not within the parentheses.
There you go. It doesn't have parentheses. If it had parentheses, it would be a method. And so now I do what we call the updater. Now, what I want to help y'all understand this, because I want y'all to see this, because this gets real confusing. I broke this down on each of its own line so you can kind of see what's going on here. So what it's doing is I created a variable and I called it, I can call this whatever I want to call it. I can give it a name if I want to, but we use I and J as a default, but you could actually call it index, because that's really what I'm doing. I'm going through the index of this questions, because question has 5 questions inside the array and it's initialized to 0. So guess what? This I right here is 0 now. And what it's saying to my compiler, if you were the compiler, what you're doing is says we're going to iterate over these questions. So I initialize I to 0. So I want to start at index 0. And as the compiler, when I get up here, it'll get to this question. Hold on for a second. Is that down here? Is that upstairs? That sound like, I guess my kid's upstairs. here's some music upstairs. So here, as the compiler, I go through that for loop and I see that 0. I know I want to initialize it 0. And I see questions, because right here, I'm asking the question, is 0, which is I, is it less than questions.length? So when I come up here to the question as the compiler, how do I know it's an array? Because I see this bracket right here. The first thing it sees once it gets past the initializer, the assignment operator, it sees that bracket and it knows that it is a array. And so the first thing it wants to know is the question it asks, is there something at 0 index? Well, it knows it's something there because here's the first string. So, okay. At least I know that, because let's say it hasn't made it to the end to line 16 yet. All it knows is that once it gets to that first bracket is that this is an array, and it knows that there's something in there at 0 because it already came to the first item. It's something there. And so what happens is with that loop on this 0, that means this is true, because remember, this is a conditional, just like your if right here we had made down here. If anything inside these curly braces is true, we're going to print that next block, right? That first block. So if this is true, it's storing that first question in memory. It says, okay, we're going to store that. Now we're going to store it where? Inside of I. I now has that first question stored. And then once it gets to that semicolon, it drops down to the updater and it lets me know, let's move to the next index, so that I becomes 1. And so it goes up here and it looks in here and it goes and it sees a comma. So it lets it know that it's a closing string. It has the open and closing quote, and it has a comma. It lets you know, okay, there's something else here, because all of this goes back to binary numbers. This has a value sign to it in binary number. That's how it knows it. And then it goes to this next string and knows, okay, it is something at 1 because there's something there. I see it. I see the opening quote, and I know it's a string, and I see the quote, closing quote. So I know that's a valid syntax. So now it's saying that it's true. And so when it's true, it goes ahead and stores it in I. And then it finishes that and come down and it updates. Now this goes to 2. It turns into index 2. And it goes all the way down until it gets to index 4. Because remember, it's 0 index. So in line 11 is index 0. Line 12 is index 1. Line 13 is index 2. Line 14 is index 3. And line 15 is index 4. So when I get down here, all of that is true. So now I'm at 4, right? Is 4 less than the length of the question.length? Well, we know that's true because it sees what is the minimum crew size. That's another index. So that's true. So now it goes ahead and stores that question inside of I right here. Now it's being stored in here. And now it comes out, it goes to update, and now it goes to 5. It comes back up here and it goes through here. It starts off at this first bracket. It knows it has an index 0. It has an index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4. But when it gets to index 5, there's no comma, and then there's an end bracket. It doesn't have an index 5. So that's false. So now the loop stops. It doesn't have to update anything else because 5, there is no 5th index. So now the loop is complete. And now it can come out and now we can write our code to be able to run the loop. So now here, let me go ahead and put these up here on on one line, like how the code is supposed to look, right? So we don't confuse you. And so I need to put that parenthesis back up there. So this is how it looks. So now I'm inside the code block. And the question was asked with a loop that programmably asks each question in the array and stores the user response. Let's go by what you already understand. On line 20, here on line, let's use line 29 because we just deleted the other one, right? So here, how would I write inside this loop the program and ask each question in the array? Because remember, I need to prompt the user. So how would I write this? And then I need to store it inside this variable right here, which is an array. Do y'all know how y'all did that? Or do you understand how you did it? Can anybody explain to me?
I go back to the method that Kamari called earlier, because now we want to check the input, which is the if. And then we want to compare the candidate answer to the given correct answer.
But that's later. Right here, I just want to, don't forget, we can use an if inside of for loop, but right here, I don't need to use an if. All I need to do is ask the question and store the answer inside the candidate's answer variable. So right now, I need that candidate answer, right? I know I'm going to store something in it, right? So I'm going to put that there for right now. How do I ask the questions? Let's go by what you already know. How did you ask the name? How did you ask the first question? What did you write? How did you do it?
So, sorry, I was ahead of it earlier, but I think this is where we use those, the array method. So in here, I chose to use push.
You definitely can use push. So how do I write that?
So I have it as after candidate answers dot push. Then we have those parentheses. That's part of it. And now we have to fill in what it is we're trying to push. Here, I think we do, I want to input the question that I want to ask. So input.question.
Okay.
And then I want to draw from that question, the array of questions.
And how do I do that?
I go to the array, choose it. So open close bracket I,
Okay, so which one? What am I? Because I've already iterated. So I got to do questions, right? Because I want those questions, right?
Uh-huh. Oh yeah,
And
sorry.
and then the reason why you use the bracket I, because the bracket is called bracket notation. It's just like the dot notation. It's giving me access. Because remember, I is storing all of the questions for me from the indexes. I need those indexes because I'm gonna need those indexes to be able to match up with the answers, the correct answers indexes. So what you did was you pushed, and you did it at the high level of when you entered your information in. You put it here inside the push. So input that question, you ask the question, and then you put questions.I, and now you're storing it, you're pushing it, everything, because we need to push everything into that array, right? We wanted to use this method because remember, how do I know this is a method? Because of that dot. So we got this candidate answer. So let me do this. Let me let's say if I console.log. I'm a console.log. I want to console.log candidate answer, but I don't want to just console.log the candidate answer. What I want to do is I want to find the type of, right? I want to say what kind of data type is this? So I'm gonna use type of candidate answer. So when I run this, put in my name, it's asking the question. So I'm gonna just put the wrong answer in there. It's an object. So candidate answer is now an object. That makes sense? Because remember, anything to the left of the dot is an object. Everything to the right of the dot is a method. Push takes an argument. I'm putting in input.question because input.question is not a value. It is a prompt. It's an object that has a prompt in it. And what I wanted to do was I passed it the argument questions, which is right here, that with the bracket notation I, which is this right here, that is storing all of those questions have been stored in I. So when it asks the question, it's able to give me access to it to the console. And when I input my information, it gets stored in the candidate answers because I pushed it into the candidate answer. Does that make sense? Is that making sense? If it's confused, I understand. Come back and watch this video later on and keep playing around with it. But is it kind of making a little sense to y'all? Y'all can let me know. Is it making a little sense to you? You saying yes? Okay. All right. So here, let me see if it'll. So right now we got the candidate answer and we're pushing. Now let me show you something. What if I did this? Yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna show you. Good question, Kamari. What if I did this? And I assign my candidate answers to the and then I took the push off of it, right? So what if I took the push off and I did it like this? Is that correct? Yeah. So if I did it like this, so if I put candidate answers and I try to input, matter of fact, let me get rid of candidate answers. What if I would have did this? If I would have did my input like this, is this what you're kind of talking about, Kamari? If I did it like this, if I did the input just like if I did it right up here on line 29, if I just did candidate answers and I input, would it store all of my answers into candidate answers into the array. Well, let's break this down. I want y'all to understand that. So let me do this. And so I'm just going to give wrong answers. It answered all of them, right? It went ahead and asked me all the questions. Now, the question is, what got stored into candidate answers? So let me do a console.log. What do you think is going to happen? So I console.log candidate answer. What it did was it gave me the answer, but really what's happening is it's only registering the last thing I input. It's not storing all 5 of my answers. It's only storing my last one, because remember, variables in JavaScript can be changed. They're mutable. And because I'm putting in these questions, it's only storing one answer at a time. So let's do something like this. Let's do another test. Let me test I. Let me run this with I. So so it gives me my index, right? So now let me do meter. Let me put 5,000. So that's at index 1. And then I'm going to save 10. And then 2. I'm just throwing something out here. And so you see the red one is the actual indexes. And then what's the size of the true? So it gave me 4 index and I did the number 3. Now, the thing about it is, the reason why I'm saying that it's not being stored inside of candidate answer as all 5 of them, if I try to come down here and I run my conditional to check each one of the answers, it's only going to give me the last one. So let's look at that. So here, it said replace the feedback in 1.2c. This is 1.2c right here. I'm going to comment this out. And all I have to do is run a console.log. And then I just need to print out what's right? Console.log. And I'm going to use a template literal. And so the first one is your answer. Your answers. Correct answers. All right, let's see. Let me see. So
What's up, baby? Okay.
all right, so Sally, let me see, meters, let me say 5,000. 40 orbit. All right, you see on your answers, it didn't pull it out what I wanted to put. Make sure I spelled it right. Yeah, candidate answers. Yeah, it didn't give me the array because it didn't really push anything into the array. All it did was stored it inside the variable, but I wanted to actually be pushed inside the array. So I wanted to show y'all that. So I'm super late to the, okay, how you doing, Teresa? That's okay. We recorded this, so whoever just popped in, I am recording this, so you'll be able to go back and pick up what we already talked about. So here, if I go back up here, remember we went ahead and logged everything out and we tested everything. Well, I want to go ahead and put it back to the way I had it, but if I did one of the things I want to share, because I'm going to get an error if I do this, and some of y'all might have done this. So let me put this back in, and then I want to do the dot push. So I'm putting it in there. So now if I run this, I'm gonna get an error once I get down to it.
Hey, babe.
You calling your babe? I'm like, who you talking to? You talking to me?
I'm sorry.
All right, so here we go. So let me go through. There we go. You see, it gave me an error because it's saying candidate answer push. It says is not a function. And the reason for that is because I'm trying to store it in a variable. You got to get rid of that variable right there. You can't store that into a variable. You got to write it exactly like that. So if anybody ever ran into that error, that's why. Did anybody run into the error like that?
I did like a dozen times. It was the part that held me up.
And that's why. Okay, so now I think we satisfied part 3. Because so you see how it stored my answers right here. So my answers, so they got stored, they got pushed into the actual array, candidate answer array. So I just wanted y'all to see that. Do y'all have any questions before? I'm going to do pseudocode for part 3 because I don't want to give the answers. I want y'all to think through it. I want y'all to finish it. So we're going to write the pseudocode for part 3. But so far, does this make sense? Is part 2 making sense to y'all? Yes, no, maybe.
The only question I had, the issue I ran into was if I put the console log for part 2, I guess, what was it, outside of the for function?
Grew on what I have on line 34, like this. Or are you talking about down here?
No, a little further up.
You talking about right here?
Yeah, if I put it right outside the curly braces for 4, it wouldn't log the answer, and I didn't understand why it wouldn't.
Well, you said the keyword outside. You were out of scope. You wanted to be inside the for loop.
Cool.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what it was. You were outside of it. So by putting that candidate push on the outside of the for loop, it's not going to work because you want it to be in scope. And we'll talk more about scoping later. But does this make sense? Did you run your code? Is it working now? Chris?
Oh, yeah, it is.
All right, cool. So now we've made it to the big part where we are going to go over. I'm going to walk you through this graded quiz, and I'm going to give you guys I'm going to give you the pseudocode, and then you're going to go in and plug in the code that's going to make it work. So here we go. So I am going to comment this little part out because I don't need that. So here we go. Now, let me break this down to you. In part 3, we don't have a to-do. There's no to-do here as the instructions apply. It says your task here is to compare the candidate answer with the correct answer. Now, let me give you a little bit of information here. Here, I need to put this back in. We already gave you, matter of fact, I'm gonna go ahead and delete all this because you really don't need to see that. I'll just take that out so it won't confuse you. This is what your candidate grade quiz look like. This is a function. And we're actually passing in a parameter called candidate answers. We already passed that in, but more on that later, not in this right now, but later on in the course. Notice we have this lead grade. We gave you that, and we're returning the lead grade. It's saying here, compare the candidate answers with the correct answers. Calculate the candidate score as a percentage, and then convey to the candidate if they have passed the quiz with an 80% or if they have failed. Now, we gave you some more instructions here, and here's what the output should look like. Now, what pseudocode mean is I'm writing this in English. I'm not writing this in code, like JavaScript code. I'm just walking you through how you need to fix it. So here we already have a variable given to us called lead grade. We're going to use that later. So this is what we call, let me put it up here for it. This is what we call declaring. That's spelled right, declaring a variable. Variable. So we just declared the variable right here. That's what declaring a variable is right here. Now, another thing you need to declare, and this is where I'm just going to write the pseudocode right here, and this is where you got to fix it. You need to declare another and initialize another variable to 0. You call it whatever you want to call it, but I want you to declare and initialize a variable with 0. So you're going to need a variable, and you're going to declare and initialize it. So you need to put another variable right here. You need to declare it and initialize it to 0. And remember the rule. Anything that you initialize with an empty string, an empty array, an empty object, or 0, you're adding something to it. So when I'm saying declare initialize at 0, think of it like a scoreboard. So there may be a hint of what you want to name the variable. So think of a scoreboard. You start off at 0. Every time you score a point, you add 1. Well, this is what that variable represents. So you're going to create initialize a variable. You're going to declare, you got to declare another variable. You need to declare and initialize another variable. Let me spell, I can't spell, it's hard to spell and type at the same time when I'm recording. With an empty string. That's another variable you're going to need. Why? Because notice here, we have this status right here. That's a key. I just gave you a hint on what you might want to call that variable. It's got to be pass or fail, because we tell you here, right here, we want you to have a variable that to convey pass or fail. See, have a pass or fail variable, right? So you're going to need a variable that's empty, because you're going to have to be able to store that pass or fail inside when you do those answers inside that variable. So that's another variable you're going to need. Now, to get your program to look like this, you're going to have to display something. And so remember, think of the keywords. When I say display, you should be thinking console.log. You're going to have to display your candidate, and you're going to use a template literal, display a template literal with a what you want to say, a label. So this is a label right here. We're labeling it the candidate name. So that's a label. So you're going to say a template literal with the label, and then you need to pass the variable. And so do you remember what that variable is? And because that variable has what? The candidate name. So you're going to go up here and get that candidate name variable, and you want to put that, and you're going to display that inside of a council.log. So far, you know you need to declare 2 more variables. You're going to have to do a display. And remember, we're inside this function. So it's reading from top to bottom. So it's going to hit that display right there. It's going to prompt the candidate name, like right here. Now, to get that 1, that 2, that 3, that 4, this is where you're going to have to do your loop. You need a loop. All right, so we need a loop, right? We need to put a loop here. So we're going to need a for loop. So we want to loop, and where am I typing? Typing in the wrong place. So we need you're going to need to put a loop, and you want to kind of do this in order. So you want to put a loop here, and you're going to remember the anatomy of the loop. You're going to loop over the candidate answer. So loop over. And don't forget, you need, when you're looping over something, the anatomy of the loop, you need to know that it's an array, and you need to get the length of it. So don't forget, you need a property. Loop over the candidate answers. I'm gonna just put with a property. So remember what the property is. Remember, length is the property. So remember, candidate answers dot length. So now I have this loop, and then inside that loop, all right, let's say the loop block, all right, inside the block inside. So they remembers we're talking about the loop still. Inside the loop, you need, not block. Inside the loop block, you need what we need a conditional. Inside the loop block, you need a conditional. And your conditionals, you're comparing something. In that conditional, you're going to have to know, because it says it right here. All right, so in the conditional where I'm at, it says checking the correct answer should be case sensitive. You're going to use your conditional inside the loop block. You need a conditional, and this is where you need to convert. Think of the method you're going to need for that, okay? So after you do that, if those, remember, when you're still inside, now we're still inside it, you're still inside the loop, inside the conditional. Now you're in the conditional. Understand the conditional has a block. So I'm saying inside the conditional, you need to, if it's true, because remember, we're inside the loop block, we are adding a conditional. In that conditional, anything in that conditional, if that's true, I want to increment the variable that you initialize with the number 0. So it says inside the conditional block, I want to increment the variable that has the 0. Is that making sense so far to y'all? Are y'all following me? Y'all following me? Yes? No? Y'all can speak up.
Yes, I'm following.
All right. All right. So now we're getting to the point to where we're asking the question. We're checking our answers, making sure we're making them case sensitive. And then remember, we're still building from top to bottom, the DOM. I need to get that one. I want to dynamically create this one with this parenthesis, right? For each one of my questions. This is where I'm still inside the for loop. So let me put that in there. So just to let you know, you're still inside the for loop. I need to print. I need to display. So I'm gonna write display. You know, when you're displaying something, you're using a console log. Because you're still in the for loop, you need a variable. And what is that variable? I'm going to give you the syntax because you're going to put this inside a console display in the console.log, a template literal. And I'm giving you this little piece of code because you're going to need this. You may not understand it, but you're going to need this variable. And this is what it looks like because you need that I, and then you want to add 1. That's a variable. Remember, I is a variable. We're still inside the loop. So this will work as long as you're within the code block or the scope. And it's going to give you, and this is what you're going to do, because remember, you're in a template literal. You can write it just like this. That's not what I want. You can do it just like that. This little piece of code right here is going to give you each one of these numbers. It's going to say 1 with that parenthesis, 1 with that parenthesis. And then you have to add the rest of your variables to give your answer and the correct answer. So all of this is still inside the template literal. Remember that. This is still inside this template literal that's inside the for loop. And you need the answer variable, your answer variable. I'm going to say var for short. And so you remember you're in the template literal, so it got to be with this right here, with that $, 2 open and closing curly brace. You need to add those variables in there. Now that you've got that done, it is telling you what? It says here, you should see the variable declaration for the grade. We already have that up here. We already did that up here. This is where you have to go in and you're going to do your calculations. We gave you the formula right here. Now, I want y'all to figure out how to write this formula. This is the formula. You're going to write this formula outside the for loop. So don't write this formula inside the for loop. The formula has to be written formula. It has to be written outside the for loop. So you're going to have this variable up here, grade. As a matter of fact, you can initialize it right here. You see what I'm saying? Are y'all following me? Initialize this right here with that formula. That makes sense? So now after you do that, you're going to initialize it, and then you got to print. You got to print these answers down here, this overall grade right here. This is going to be another, like I said, display. Whenever you're displaying something, you're doing what? You're creating a console.log. We want to display all of this information. I'm just going to copy this right here. You got to figure out how to break this down and display this. You're going to display this with the template literal. So, I got that grade. That's a part of the template literal. These little chevrons, you're going to put those chevrons in there. You're going to type out these words, and then this is going to be a variable right here. This percentage is going to be a variable. This 2 is a variable. That 5 is a variable. Now, you put it in the parentheses, that's typed in because it's still inside the template literal, as well as these chevrons. That is the console.log. But guess what? If you write your conditional, you can do a conditional because you still need a conditional to check if everything passed. You're going to write a conditional. I'm going to put it up right here. You need a conditional. If you passed or failed, you need a condition. So you need the if else. And in that condition, after that condition, then you're going to console.log that variable that you created up here that I was telling you that needs an empty string. And we give you a hint. You can call it status. And so this is a variable right here that failed is going to give me that status. Your status is going to be inside of your conditional. Inside that conditional, you have to compare your grades. And if it's true, if it's less than 8, if it's greater than 80, you know it passed. So if that's true, you're going to run that block of code. You don't have to use a console.log. You could just assign the variable, because all you're doing is storing it. And then when we do the console.log after the conditional, then you pass in that variable status that you created, and it's going to let you know if it passed or failed at the end. That makes sense? So without me actually writing it all out, I've actually kind of gave you the pseudocode. Now you just got to go back through, look at this video. If you wasn't typing this stuff out, which matter of fact, since you guys are on the channel right now and other people are not, I'm going to put this in the chat for you. So you have the pseudocode written out for you. Anybody have any questions? I will put these up in the JavaScript. I will put it in our the channel that I created, the JavaScript review. I will put them there. If you've already turned on your notifications, subscribe to my channel, and turned on your notification, you're going to be notified when it goes up there, when I upload the new videos. So if you're not on my channel, make sure you are you go ahead and do the notifications and hit that bell. And when you subscribe to my channel, get the notifications and the bell, you'll be alerted every time I upload a new video. Okay? All right. Are y'all good? Y'all understand? No questions? Because I'm about to stop sharing.
Well, I thought it was helpful that even though we had a list of to-dos for the assignment, breaking it down and picking up keywords is really helpful. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And I hope that this helped a lot of you, because that's the way that I like to teach. I want to make sure that you understand